Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 132. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at vJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
I'm doing great, John. We are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Awesome, Nick. Hey, so this week we have part 2 of our discussion with Jonathan Frappier.
And if you missed part 1, don't forget to go back and listen. Jonathan had some early teaching experience that he carried into his IT experience. He started blogging on the side to build a body of work, and he ended up joining a larger company and had to deal with some of the challenges of, I don't have big company experience in the interview process.
Yeah, definitely, if you haven't listened to episode 131, it's worth a listen. Great discussion, and Jonathan's like a really interesting conversation. I just can't wait to get back and talk to him again, to be honest. I think in part 2, the stuff that I'm looking forward to is maybe the discussion that he had about getting into vBrownBag, because that's an organization that I've, consumed the content of a bunch. And then also like kind of the tickling around the edges of career burnout.
And that was one of those things that we've talked about before. You don't always know is going to come out in the interview, but you'll see that it does. It was a very interesting discussion of the way he kind of pulled himself out. And if you think about it, it was actually based on some project management principles that he'll talk about too.
Yeah, I also like his kind of introduction and discussion of the Scrum stuff that he got into a little bit later on, a little bit more recently, I suppose. That was really helpful to kind of get his perspective and overview of that methodology. I was going to say technology, but it's not really a technology. Methodology.
Yeah, great stuff for sure.
Cool. Yeah, so let's not give too much of a preview, although we've probably already gone past that, and get into the actual episode. Here it is, the second part of our conversation with Jonathan Frappier.
Well, I know at some point before that, you got involved with vBrownBag. Can you just tell everybody what that is real quick in case someone listening doesn't know what it is and how you got involved and maybe how it impacted this role?
Sure. So vBrownBag is a community-run, community-fed. We've called it a podcast for a long time. I think it's more than that. It's somewhere between a webinar and a informal learning platform. So it would be you or I, there's a topic we're interested in and we want to present on that topic, maybe just because we love it, maybe because we're just trying to get visibility into a technology or a company that we want to work for. And the more we can be out there talking about super cool tool X, the better for my chances to get that next job using that whatever that technology is. So it actually had started maybe a year or two before I joined as an informal study group. Like, hey, we're all studying for our VCP. I'm going to take section 1 and really deep dive super into section 1 of the blueprint. You take section 2 and you take section 3, and then we're all going to get back together and we'll teach each other what we learned. Instead of trying to have to spread ourselves too thin across different areas, I can dive super deep on vMotion and you can dive super deep on DRS and you can dive super deep on storage. So the people that were working on it were recording. They were recording live, but I think mostly it was the output of those live webinars that they were doing that people would then go and consume. And when I was going for my VCP, found those to be extremely helpful. And they had just Cody Bunch, who got it started, had just threw a tweet out one day. It's like, hey, we're looking for help on vBrownBag. I was like, well, I'm using all your stuff to study, so I might as well I might as well provide some support somewhere. And, at first it was just, I had never hosted a podcast or even done any sort of live speaking, whether on a video conference or in person. So it's like, hey, here I am. I'll do something. What's a task that sort of stinks right now that I can help? And it was like, take our recordings, clean them up, and put them on YouTube. All right, cool. I can do that. And it evolved over time. It's definitely the type of group where you can make it into what you want it to be. So it helped me in terms of speaking and presenting and on tying in on all those educational aspects at some point, when we ran out of topics for what the VCPs were at the time. Well, what do we do next? Well, let's talk to the people on Twitter that are listening to us. Let's talk to our coworkers. What's the next thing you need to learn? Oh, you need to learn DevOps. Oh yeah, that seems kind of important. Let's figure that out. Let's get people in to talk about those technologies so we can branch out from, the VMware focused topics to other technologies. And now they go anywhere from Python to AI to, I think they just did one on how to get into the video game industry through technology. So they cover a lot of different topics now from how it started.
That's really cool. That sounds like it really fed that the teaching part, that giving back part that you emphasized earlier on too.
So I have to admit, I think that I made a bad assumption there, Jonathan, because in my mind, having not really discussed it with you before, I figured that vBrownBag and your participation in that was what gave you the extra boost for the recruiter to want you for that job. Maybe that was a bad assumption.
It was a good assumption. It just, the way the two lined up, I think when I started at EMC, I was really more in the background and not hosting yet, not having presented any topics on vBrownBag. So once I started at EMC, one of the things that I didn't plan on and didn't come up in the interview is that we actually had to teach the content we were putting together, both in person, like instructor-led type formal courseware and the hands-on labs. So when I found out about that, having never presented or done any sort of public speaking, I was a bit nervous. And getting through those first couple of classes, I think gave me the confidence to say, well, I clearly know enough about what I'm talking about. I just taught a room full of solutions architects things about VMware they didn't know before. And being in that environment, being able to answer questions live, I held my own, or at least I felt I did. Everyone said I did a good job. So then I was more willing to participate in some of the public aspects of what vBrownBag was doing, hosting, asking our presenters questions, getting on, presenting myself, which led me to presenting live vBrownBag at VMworld, which led me to presenting at some other local tech events like vMugs.
Yeah, and that's the stuff that's all part of that body of work that ends up on YouTube, that is publicly accessible, much like your blog, all part of what we might call career capital that you can cash in on. It's interesting that the need to teach the courses didn't come up in the interviews. Does that just fall into the other duties as assigned bullet?
Yeah, I think that's how they thought of it, or they lost enough candidates who didn't want to do the in-person teaching. So maybe they just left that part out and figured we'd deal with it when we got around to it.
It sounds like you took it in stride. How did your teammates take it? I mean, I assume you were part of a team that was doing all this.
Mm-hmm. So two of my other teammates, my manager and one other person at the time, or two other people at the time, had been in the team for a while. So they knew that was part of the job. Myself and one other person who had just started, I think it was new for us. It was definitely new for me. We got up, my manager was really good about breaking up the work and recognizing that we hadn't taught before or built classes. So the way he structured the layout of those courses, we sort of got to do some of the more basic stuff first and understand the process and what went into producing good content and presenting good content, and how labs could be structured so that people walk away and actually get something out of those. So it took a few iterations of different courses and different labs to really get our feet wet. But then once that happened, we were there was a couple of classes and labs we threw together with nothing but product videos, because we couldn't get our hands on anything prior to when the courses needed to be out.
Wow. Yeah, I guess in that case, you just kind of get told we need courses on these things, and hey guys, go figure out how to make this happen so we can get people to pay money for it.
Yeah. In some cases to get people to pay money for it. A lot of cases it was to get our field teams able to deploy this in person. So being, EMC being the storage background leg of the VMware universe, a lot of people were transitioning from, hey, I know how to provision LUNs and, configure different switches for my SAN, but I don't know how to vMotion anything. I don't even know what vMotion is in that context. So there was a lot of upskilling on the software side for the people that were in-house at EMC.
Now, at some point, you actually you were with vBrownBag and for quite a while, and I think sometime, let's see, did it overlap the time you were at Dell or go past that, or excuse me, Dell EMC, or go past that when you decided to maybe take a step back from vBrownBag?
I probably was wrapping up my vBrownBag things just about when I left Dell. I think it was right around 2017, 2018. I knew I was burnt out. I didn't know why. So I just started peeling things back. It got to a point where, I had been doing this for almost 20 years. Blogging was fun for a while, and then I accidentally turned it into a business and stopped enjoying that. vBrownBag was fun, and I got to meet a lot of people, but that, even though that accelerated, I think, my career a little bit and helped what I was doing at EMC, that it was so similar to what I was doing for work also started to feel like work instead of giving back. So I didn't know at that point where I was losing interest or where my passion had gone for technology. So I just started getting rid of things. I was like, well, I'm not writing as often. Let me back up the blog, archive it on GitHub, and it's gone. Okay, I don't feel any better. I'm not going to go to any conferences this year. So still don't feel great. Let's stop doing vBrownBag. Nope, still not feeling good. And, burnout's a tricky thing to overcome. So I really just kept peeling everything back until there wasn't a lot of extracurricular tech things left. Home lab got turned off, powered off, stuck in the closet. So it was just work left at that point, and needed to find some other activities.
I mean, that's solid problem solving, right? You just start turning things off until the problem goes away.
Yeah.
And then
until someone calls you screaming.
Yeah.
Those were always the most fun. It's like, what does the server do? We have no idea. It's been plugged in since we got here. All right, well, there goes the network cable. And nothing, the lights still are on. No one's screaming, so it wasn't running life support.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's probably the most sane way to deal with kind of like career burnout and, general burnout as well. Is like, oh, I better start, pulling the plug on a bunch of stuff, that I know is not, critical to what it is that I'm doing. And it's, I don't know if you had to go the whole 9 and, quit your job and, find a smaller place to live and, sell your car and ride a bicycle everywhere. Like, some people have to take it to that level, but, we all do what we have to do, right, to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, for me, it was my daughter came to the rescue a little bit there. When I was a kid, one of the things I always wanted to do was snowboard, but that was like pretty early in like snowboarding world, and I didn't live anywhere near a mountain that I could go, just pick up a board and figure it out. So she came home one day and said, I want to learn to snowboard. I was like, oh, all right. So we got her some lessons and we threw her out there. And after one of her lessons one day, she's like, when are you going to snowboard with me? And my wife and I looked at each other, like, oh, I guess we need to take lessons. So we spent the next couple of years bruised and battered, falling down local ski trails until we figured it out. And I'm definitely a happier camper in the winter when I get a good amount of snowboarding in.
That's awesome.
Do you do any waterboarding or water ski? The snowboarding equivalent on a lake, whatever it's called.
I have not tried that yet.
I think it's called surfing.
There you go.
Waves aren't big enough on the East Coast, at least where I live.
I'm striking out today, everybody. Striking out.
Yeah, I think it is amazing to find something outside work and, hobbies that have started to feel like work that actually does recharge you. So that's a really good lesson to stumble onto.
Yeah, it was good timing. I think, the last year and a half now that everyone's had to go through, I think it's more important than ever now because we're in a lot of cases remote at home more than most of us have probably ever been, stuck in our house before in front of a computer screen all day to do literally everything, whether it's work or talking to your doctor or talking to your kids' teachers. Like we're constantly connected now. So I think now more than ever finding something outside maybe that you've always sort of thought you might be interested in or want to get back into. Super important now to sort of maintain that balance that, I think 2020 sort of jumped in and blew up on everybody.
Once you've done that elimination process that you went through when you were burned out and recharged, found a nice hobby, how do you determine if and when the time is right to take on something else new that's tangential to what you do at your day job, something in the tech industry? Or is that something you would rather not do again?
So it comes in waves for me right now. So you had sent me, we exchanged some emails. Oh, I think it was a Friday or Saturday. You might have messaged me on a Friday and I replied on a Saturday sort of thing. And you caught me on the way up, right? So it's still sort of, right in that wave of, burnout coming in and kicking you in the gut when you least expect it sort of thing. If you had sent me that message on like a Monday or a Tuesday, I probably would have just been, I don't have the energy to do it. But you caught me catching a good wave. So rode that. We're here now. So I think understanding, or maybe it might be hard to understand it. And this process and talking to you guys might actually be helping me sort of figure out like surfing, which I got to do a few times early in my career because I had to travel out to California, but sort of being able to see the wave coming and not have it knock you over, and instead sort of get up on top of it and ride that and use some of that natural energy that your body and your brain and your emotions are going to be able to grab onto. If you can ride that, way better than getting knocked over and, eating a bunch of jerk. So, I think you need to be able to look out for how you're feeling at any given moment and recognize that even if you're down, whether it's the extracurricular stuff or whether it's, the day job just really beating you up, is to know to look up, because there's going to be a wave that's going to come in and maybe pick you up and give you that extra boost of energy to do some things that you hadn't done in a while or want to try to do that's new.
That's a really good point. I mean, in fact, it's a great analogy, right? Because like you said, there's always going to be waves coming. And you don't need to try to ride every wave. Some waves you can duck under, mm-hmm. right? Some waves you can just like let pass you by. And then it's that skill of catching the wave and riding it, that it's dangerous. But what you definitely don't want to do is to not know the wave is coming and have it mm-hmm. crash on you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the hard part is, for me, on the days that are rough, and there have been days where I just woke up I woke up one Monday, and whatever I was dreaming about that night, I woke up and thought it was like Thursday. And by the time I got through the grogginess, I was like, it's only Monday. My whole week was shot. But having that awareness and having gone through those, those waves of in the ups and downs, I was able to be like, all right, I know this week's not great right now. So, at least let me look around and see what's coming. And, once you can have some self-awareness like that, I think that's how you start to pick yourself up and get out of it.
Were there any other warning signs at the point where you were getting closer to burnout that maybe someone outside of you alerted you to? Or was it something that you were the one that detected it on your own?
I don't think anyone else noticed. Maybe my wife, and I probably wasn't listening to her as close as I should have been. Maybe noticed some things. But for me, it was just it became more of a constant dread of whatever I was doing. It was like, I got to schedule the next 3 months of vBrownBag, or like, I got to go to VMworld again. Like, I really just don't want to get on a plane. Like, just every time something was coming up, it was like, there's a VMUG I'm going to present at. And sounded like a great idea to volunteer to present, 2 months ago. But now that it's the day of, like, I really don't want to do that, or, working on presentations along the way. Everything didn't feel great at that point. And it was how I sort of figured out that the, burnout was either coming or already here. And I just didn't realize it yet.
Now, at the point at which you start to say no to something you've done for a long time, even though you know it's best for you, does that become extremely difficult if it's something you once enjoyed?
Absolutely. There was a TEDx talk. The title is The Magic of Not Giving a Bleep. And if I recall, I think the presenter, I think she had a book on it. Maybe I could be totally making that up or confusing it with another speaker that I saw. But the gist of what she was trying to say, and I'm certainly not going to do it justice, so it's definitely worth Googling, not on your work computer since there's a bleep in there. So do that from home, not on the company network. But she talked about, how emotionally there's only so much you have to give. And she sort of related that back to like a budget. So if I've got 4 things on my schedule today and 2 of them really don't give me any joy, it's perfectly okay as a person to say no, thank you. And I think there's a lot of pressure from maybe more so with technology, or maybe I'm just not remembering the pre-technology days where you get an invite to something, it's right there, it's in your face. Now it's an email, or somebody sends you a message on Hangouts or Slack, or sends you a text, or can get in touch with you literally anywhere because we walk around with our phones attached to us instead of being hung up on a wall in the house. So I think in a lot of ways we forgot that it's perfectly okay to say no thanks. I don't want to do that. And that's okay. And you're not being mean by saying no thank you. You can be completely polite and say no thank you. I don't want to go to that extracurricular work function, after I've spent 8-9 hours with you. I want to go home and see my kid. I don't have to feel guilty about that. And anytime I was being asked to do something, I always sort of thought back to that talk that she gave, and was like, well, is this the thing I want to spend my budget on right now, or do I want to focus that somewhere else?
That's great. I think I've heard that same thing when it comes to task management, right? At the beginning of the day, the brain is like this massive drain on blood sugar, right? It takes so much energy to run the human brain. There's only so many things that you can actually spend your attention on in a day. And especially towards the end of the day, you have to come up against, stuff like, your family and, in personal stuff. And unfortunately it does tend to be at the end of the day. But we just need to make sure there's enough, blood sugar left for those things that we find important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I just never thought about it. I think I thought about it in terms of like the, do this stuff early in the day because, it's super important and it's going to take a lot of energy and attention. But I never thought past work. And so this is really illuminating for me. Right now, you need to reserve time and energy for all the stuff that is the real world, your real
exactly.
life.
Yeah.
I bet that's got to be pretty aligned with burnout, is not leaving enough time and energy to deal with the world, right, past work. And burnout has to be, pretty tightly correlated with running out of that energy, early in the day. And then it becomes this vicious cycle, right? Like when you run out too early, and then you also need to like wake up the next day and hit the ground running, you're burning a lot more energy and you're dipping into the reserves, and then all of a sudden there's nothing left in the tank, and you wake up and you can't even get out of bed.
Yeah. And I think so. Another part of my career that I picked up at EMC and a little bit with vBrownBag around like how to manage projects and diving into Scrum and Agile a bit more in terms of like a project management framework, I think also sort of, aligns to that sort of budgeting your energy and your time and what you can do, and there are some days where maybe, you've got, let's call it $5 in your budget to spend, to pay out for things throughout the course of the day. And there's others where you might think you've got $5, and after you spend $1, you're like, nope, there's nothing left. While it was actually empty. So, being able to plan and pivot is a good skill to have, and realizing that, I've only spent $1 so far out of my budget for the day, but I know if I spend the last 4, like I'm going to be pretty useless, tomorrow, and I've still got 3 more days after that to get through the week. So am I better served spending that $5 Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and maybe taking unplanned Tuesday off, even if it's going to, maybe a deadline gets pushed or whatever, but deadlines getting pushed are probably better, in my opinion, than deadlines being met with poor solutions that end up not working out anyways.
Or deadlines pushed unexpectedly because everybody's burned out.
Yeah.
Or in the hospital.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. Even more severe.
I feel like I heard a story about somebody who had a note or some kind of reminder in their phone that told them that they needed to leave some for home, leave something in the tank for the family. And that's all I could think about while you were talking about your experience.
Yeah, we got probably thanks to my daughter, but really more because we didn't do a great job of remembering things. It was we put everything in our Google calendars. So there are days where I'll get 20 invites from my wife because she's planning something, and it's an invite for every single thing that she's got going on, just so we don't forget. And we make it a habit of regularly, not so much in 2020 because we weren't going anywhere, but regularly checking in on that calendar. And it's like, oh, Wednesday, that thing's coming up. So I would know going into Wednesday morning that, where there's a dance recital or some other event going on family wise that I knew I had to leave money for. So, writing stuff down, having, if a calendar works for you, it works for my family. That's great. I know people who love doing like almost mini project management things or to-do list apps, whatever works for you to remind yourself that there's the important stuff to do after work in addition to the day job. So getting all that in one spot so you can step back and, look up at your wall if writing stuff down on a whiteboard or a chalkboard works for you, whatever it is, just so you can see everything together and recognize where maybe you've got to pull something back. Like maybe it's not the best idea to work an all-nighter on Tuesday when I'm supposed to take my kid to something on Wednesday, if I can move stuff around or reschedule a thing.
That's super healthy. I think I'm going to have to do more to adopt that. I think that makes total sense. We manage our work calendars that way, right? Like, oh no, that conflicts with this other thing, so I can't do that. And actually, I can't take that meeting because that'll be my fourth meeting, back to back to back to back. But then we'll turn around and not pay attention to that kind of thing for home. And, the meetings, quote unquote meetings that we have with our, significant others, with our kids, with, other parts of the family. And I could definitely see how that impacts and lowers the quality of those interactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Never mind just the stuff you forget. When you're trying to just do it on the fly, like you said, you wouldn't try to do it at work. You've got project plans in your work calendar that stuff's stacked up in, but then we walk out of work and we're like, I'm going to remember everything. Probably not.
Yeah, there's only so much RAM in that brain.
Yeah, I got to replace a couple chips, I think.
Yeah.
Can't find my screwdriver, though.
Well, I hear persistent memory is cheaper, so keep that in mind. You still need some DRAM, but as long as the ratio's right.
I think Nick was talking about making sure that you have stuff. It doesn't need to be on the same die.
Yeah.
That's what you were saying, right? You mentioned getting into Scrum, though. And I think I've only peripherally known that as like a flavor or an implementation of like agile development. Mm-hmm. Is that how you're using it, or were you using it as like a generic project management solution?
So we started talking about it. Matthew Broberg, I think, brought it up. We used to do this thing up here. It was around EMC, but then sort of just branched out and pulled some other people in. We called it a nerd herd, where everyone just rolled into a Dunkin' Donuts, before work and grabbed their coffee, and we all sat around and geeked out for a little bit. And then I think it was him that brought up this idea of Kanban and like being able to track what you're doing in a very simple format, with the understanding that the way humans are really truly wired is we can really only do one thing at a time. So if I'm trying to write a script for my web application while working in SQL Management Studio, like I'm probably going to trip over myself because they're two pretty fundamentally different things at the end of the day, even if they are related. So this idea to lay things out in a very simple way, like here's all the things I know I need to do. Are there any things that need to get, what's the order they need to get done in? Like I've got to do one before I do two and before I do three. So let me put those in order. Are any of those things going to be, am I waiting on anything to get any of those things accomplished? So if I need to get some prereq in order to do number one, and number two relies on number one, I know I can't start any of those things right now. So that sort of led me into investigating how that was being used, and where I found Agile and Scrum. And like you mentioned, it's when I first picked it up, it was really everything I could find on it was around like software development. But as I started reading about it and thinking about really what the point they were trying to get to is like, yeah, that's great for software development, but why can't I use that as a sysadmin or a systems engineer? I've still got to plan my work. I've still got to deliver things to my team or to my company. I can apply those same concepts in that same methodology as a sysadmin. I said, I think this actually fits for training when I was at EMC. Like, let's try to do this from a content perspective. Like, how do I put out enough content to people in the field that they've got what they need? Maybe it's not fully polished on day one, but then I can get some feedback and make the changes and then give them the final polished version a week from now, but they've already got a leg up on what they need to know. And then I can finish it off based on the feedback they've had. So maybe I'm a Scrum fanboy a little bit, but I sort of fail to see where Scrum doesn't fit, whether it's technology, whether it's any other, professional function that you might have to do. It's really about identifying the work that actually needs to get done and understanding how much you can reasonably do with whatever time frame you're given.
Well, and that focus on one thing at a time and getting the fast feedback is very much in line with the idea of deliberate practice, which we know leads to mastery.
Yeah, it's if you're trying to do too much, and for I've been in roles where I've been the only IT person or operations person at my company, so you're spread out so thin and all over the place trying to support everybody. You're not focused on any one thing, and you don't necessarily get that mastery. So, whether it's just planning out your day or using it as a way to figure out how to stay focused, I think is a super helpful tool.
Is that something that you feel like is able to be applied, like not just in work, but throughout like non-work functions too? Like, I don't know, family trip planning and, planning for holidays and those kinds of things, that maybe could help to combat, impending burnout, to keep those kinds of things at bay.
Yeah, I do. I think you can use it just about anywhere if you're diligent about it. I think where Scrum and Agile becomes tricky is there's this misconception that it means you can do more work, when in reality, it's about prioritizing the right work to get done at the right time. So as long as you recognize that, yes, you're going to spend a decent amount of time planning. So whether you're trying to plan out that family vacation or a family gathering or application upgrade at work, you're going to spend a lot of time not feeling like you're not doing anything. And that's okay, because the outcome of that plan is knowing what you can achieve realistically, when you can achieve it. And there's not going to be as many gotchas in the end. I remember at EMC, as my team was sort of piloting how to apply Scrum to building the content that we were working on, there was another team who came over to me and said, "Hey, we heard you're doing this like Scrum thing. Like, can you like explain it to us?" And I was like, happy to help you learn about it and whatnot. Got together with that team, showed them what we were doing, explained how we were using it from a training perspective, getting feedback to deliver things quickly, iterate on it, make the changes where maybe we missed the requirement or misunderstood a requirement. And the team looked at it and said, "We don't have enough time to do that sort of planning. We just got to get stuff done," which is a great theory, but they never actually ended up producing anything that was usable because they didn't spend any time planning. So it's sort of that catch-22. It's like, yeah, I spent 2 days not writing anything. I didn't write any content. I didn't write any labs. I didn't set up my lab environment. I didn't do any upgrades. But on Wednesday morning, I know exactly what I need to do now. And I can actually get that done in a planned, reasonable order so that I'm not burnt out just doing everything and wasting, extra time on tasks that aren't required.
Yeah, it's the idea of giving yourself everything full kit in the manufacturing world.
Yeah, yep. When I've presented on it in the past, the example I like to use is, I'll ask the room, has anyone replaced the faucet like in your bathroom or whatever? And normally there's at least a handful of people that have replaced the faucet or something along those lines. And I always ask, how long would it take you? You replace your faucet. And most people would, I turn off the water and, I disconnect. Yeah, I could probably do that in, 30 minutes, maybe an hour. I was like, cool, you got extra faucets in your house? And they're like, well, no. I was like, oh, so you got to drive to the store, right? Where's the closest hardware store where you can buy a faucet? Oh, that's a 30-minute drive? You just blew your budget because you just told me you could replace a faucet in 30 minutes. You haven't even gotten to the store yet to buy your faucet. Now you got to find it, check out, drive back home. So you're an hour and you told me 30 minutes and now it's an hour and a half. If you told me 30 minutes at work and 2 hours later, you haven't given me a solution yet, now I'm annoyed, right? So it sort of brings to light all of those supporting things that you need to get done in order to really be successful at doing something.
Now, with your current role as a cloud systems engineer, I imagine this came in handy even more.
Yeah, there's a ton of moving targets. There's a lot of different teams. involved in my current role that maybe aren't directly things that I need to do for that particular team, but I know that there might be some output from another team or another group that's going to be something that I'm going to require before I can finish something off. So like, yeah, I might be able to stand up some new instances in AWS or, migrate a SQL server to RDS or something like that. But if I don't have the things that I need from other teams to finish that off, I can at least have them documented and highlighted in a way so that it is visible to everyone across the organization that like, oh yeah, like team one needs to finish this. They're planning on that taking 2 weeks. It's going to take me 2 weeks post getting their output in order to do something. And you've only budgeted 2 weeks total for this project, which in theory, I can do my part in 2 weeks and they can do their part in 2 weeks, but they rely on one another. And you can show those dependencies and relationships between the two. I
have a suspicion, and maybe this is experience, that when I point out those things to my family and to my wife, that I need to couch that conversation in a certain way. And I imagine that that's true for my coworkers as well, as far as pointing out that a target is probably unreasonable.
Yeah, it's, one of the things, and I missed the formal classes I took for Scrum, sort of the self-learning I went through. I never thought of a fixed date as a requirement, but once the education department at EMC really dove in and adopted Scrum, the formal Scrum master we had, I was struggling with how to work with this other group. And she pointed out, she's like, listen, if they're giving you a fix, like they need this on August 1st, that becomes a requirement. That has to become something that you negotiate on. If you've got 4 people on your team and this is the amount of work they can produce, if August 1st is a hard requirement, well then, maybe they don't get X, Y, and Z. They only get A, B, and C. Now, if you're willing to move August 1st, now you can get X, Y, and Z. But once all those things are listed out and you really think even if something is like a deliverable date or a go live date as a Scrum requirement, then you can say, okay, if that can't move, if that date is set in stone, there's no changing it, well, then we just work backwards.
Here's the things that we can get done by that date. So not everything can be set in stone, right? Like all these features and all this and all that and all this infrastructure and the date has to be this. It's like, well,
one of them's got to give.
Yeah.
Dependency mapping at its finest. You're instead of doing your app dependency mapping before you migrate an application, you're doing it for this whole project.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. And in understanding those things, like it, as silly as it sounds, it might not be possible for somebody, without the background to really like dive into that and illuminate all those things and then understand like what's reasonable and what's not reasonable.
Yeah, I think one of the cool tools that is not necessarily, I guess it's part of Scrum in a way, it is that Kanban board, is having that visualization of all of the task and the flow that any particular task needs to go through. So on the Kanban board, they call them swim lanes. So there's like everything that needs to happen, all your backlog of things that you want to get done. There's things that are blocked. There's things that are in progress. There's things that are now done. And you can sort of tweak those swim lanes to fit your project management methodology, your company culture. Well, or, maybe you've got security requirements where any script that I write before I can use it in production needs to get reviewed by a security team. Well, you add a swim lane for that. And if you know that security team needs 2 weeks notice before they're going to review your script, well, now you can factor those timelines in and you don't get caught off guard of, oh yeah, I know I can write the script in 2 weeks, but I also know that the security team's got to review it and they need 2 weeks. So right off the bat, we're talking 4 weeks. So if you're thinking I can do it in 2, but I can't give it to you in 2 because there's other dependencies that we have as an organization or whatever, however you're using it to map those out, put it up on a board so that everyone can look at it and it's not dissimilar to a Gantt chart back in the day, but you're not trying to do it all at once and I'm going to deliver you step 1 so you can look at it, and then I'm going to go work on step 2 versus I'm going to work on all the steps and then deliver it to you at the end and realize I misinterpreted step 3.
I really appreciate the 10-minute boot camp on Scrum. Like that's been super helpful for me. It makes me want to go investigate it a little bit deeper.
There's a couple cool, like really short books. I'll send you a link to them after this. So if you want to include them in the notes, they were very easy to digest and short reads. And it was just very like, oh, well, when you put it that way, it makes total sense. I get that now.
Yeah. And if they're on Audible, then I'm just going to have to add them to my reading list. Do love audiobooks.
Yeah, we will definitely would love those links and those pointers. Jonathan, really appreciate the time that you spent with us here this evening, kind of reviewing your career and a bunch of lessons learned here. I think it's going to take some time for Nick and I to really digest like all the stuff, the cool stuff that you've outlined and what we've learned this evening. Really appreciate your time.
Well, I enjoyed being on. Glad you caught me on. Glad I saw the wave coming.
Glad you're able to surf the wave. Thanks again. Nick, I think we ended with the discussion of Scrum and Agile methodologies. That was fascinating for me because that's usually like a software engineering thing, but really it's a generic project management and task management type of idea. But I also want to back up and make sure that we talk again about just the methodology that Jonathan used to kind of pull back from burnout. Just that peeling away of stuff until he found, enough had been peeled away.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed hearing him describe what it was like to give up something that he had once very much enjoyed, and kind of the process of doing that and being okay with it. It's probably pretty tough to give up what you once loved once it becomes a part of your identity, so I could see how it would be a struggle, but if you're not feeling like yourself and not feeling well mentally, physically, then yeah, you need to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure it's like something that all of us face, especially, right now we're recording in kind of the middle of 2021 with lots of outside stresses with coronavirus and whatnot. So, probably a lot of us are facing issues of, feeling cooped up and having a lot of outside anxiety and stress piled on top of all of the career stuff that we have going on. So I think very timely to hear about, that method. It's, one thing, maybe not going to work for everybody, but it's really good to hear like how, one person walked out of the desert.
100%. And we need to be telling these success stories because there are people out there who probably are in the burnout zone pretty heavy. Tom Hollingsworth talked about it a little bit in a previous episode and how he got out of it by setting achievable goals and not reaching too much. And, Jonathan peeled back the layers. That's another great approach. So if you're someone who might be what we would call racing on the edge of burnout, as I coined from Tom Hollingsworth, you need to be able to recognize it, and hopefully you could do something about it before it's too late and something bad really happens.
Yeah, definitely. I think those Tom Hollingsworth episodes are totally worth going back and listening to. I think that was 125, 126, 127. If you are not in the table of contents for our podcast, which you probably aren't because I don't think we've made one. Very cool discussion and very, very timely, as you point out. So anything else before we get out of here?
I just want to say that we want to help people tell their stories. If you're listening, I'm sure you have a story of a unique experience that would help somebody move their career forward. Don't be shy. Reach out, because we are always listening for good stories, aren't we, John?
Definitely, 100%.
Just a reminder that we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if you were being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
All right, farewell listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at vJourneyman, Finnick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.